Hello everyone, and welcome to the first dose of medicine for 2025. I'm Naz, your host and co-founder of Women Are the Medicine. I don't know about you, but this year already feels big and full of transformation, and yet I know that we're going to need all the support that we can muster. So this podcast aims to amplify the voices of women the world needs to hear so desperately. These are change makers, visionaries, entrepreneurs, witches, and healers whose wisdom can empower us all to come home to ourselves and bring our gifts to the world. So I just want to say, if you're a regular listener, we would love to say thank you so much. We appreciate you for all of your support. And if you are new to us and you like what you hear, it would help boost the impact of this podcast by sharing and subscribing. Okay, so for today's episode, I am over the moon to be speaking with the Seed Sistas. This is Fiona Heckles and Goodweather, who are herbalists, activists, and self-proclaimed herbal drama queens. They bring theatrical flair to plant education. They are medically trained, steeped in plant magic and folklore, and they are here to reconnect people with the healing power of local plants through workshops, performances, courses, and they champion empowerment, autonomy, and diversity in healthcare. Ladies, hello and welcome to Women of the Medicine podcast. It's so great to have you here.
Thanks for having us. Lovely to see you.
Oh, it's lovely to see you too, Fiona. And I love the colour that you guys are bringing. I know I'm here in South Africa and you're in the UK, but it looks like there's some sunshine there, Kaz, and everyone's looking bright and glowing. So I'd love to dive in. I've spoken a little bit now about that introduction. Your gifts are reconnecting people with the healing power of plants, but I would love to hear from each of you on how you came to this path, how you came to this journey. Fiona, I don't know if you want to kick us off.
Well, yeah. So we met about 25 years ago, but both of us have been interested in plants since we were little. I spent much of my childhood in the Lake District here in the UK, which is in the mountains and amongst the rivers and cliffs there, and just that real sense that nature's a playground, we're part of nature. It's not just beautiful wallpaper to be admired, that there's this real sense of playfulness and connection with nature. And I was lucky enough to get a job with actually the mum of my best mate opened a franchise of a herb shop in Newcastle where I grew up. And she said, "Do you want to come and work here?" And that was everything that was in that shop. It was the herbs that really sang to me. And she took me on a week-long course in Dorset when I was 16. And I met a herbalist called Chantal Cabrera. And I was like, wow, you can actually do this for a job. This is what I'm going to do. And then that sort of set my trajectory from there, really. And was like, right, what do I need to do? To change my A levels to be science and all the rest of it. Went off traveling for a bit. And that whole thing about as soon as you start getting interested in plants, people around you start asking and are interested, because what we've realized is that everyone needs herbs. So I felt really lucky that by the time I already got to university, I'd had quite a lot of practice and I'd been working with the plants for quite a long time. So that's up to that point, I suppose.
Yeah, amazing. I love that your friend's mum was sort of like this guide at that time in your life. I mean, what a gift that the universe sent you to sort of help steer you in that direction, and that you had that affinity from such a young age and you were able to find it. We'll get onto this a bit later, but I think as women, we can sometimes really overcomplicate what we're meant to be doing, because it feels like the things that we're interested in, the things that we really love, it's like, can we make a career out of those? What can we do? And it just proves is a really good example of how when you connect to your heart's desire, it can pull you on this path that has so much depth, right? So much depth.
Yeah, and that thing about university, because we met on a 4-year degree in medical herbalism, and the voices, my parents and whatever were like, that's very vocational. That it doesn't leave many options afterwards. That's what you're doing, and I was like, this is all I'm doing. So it was that. Yeah, it's a knowing, isn't it, when you find something that you love
Yeah.
and connect.
And knowing that you can cut everything away that doesn't need to be there and just focus, which is, why you are both such experts in this area. So Kaz, tell me about how you came to be in the path of plants.
Well, my family are from Europe, so both parents and grandparents came as displaced people, as refugees into the UK with the Second World War. We're a Jewish family. And my paternal side are Hungarian and Austrian, and my maternal side are Czech. So in those countries, it's very normal for people to use and work with herbs and plant medicine every day. And so I was brought up with just simple things like chamomile tea is a simple thing, or peppermint that you would have with a dodgy tummy. And I was very rarely taken to a doctor. I was treated a lot more naturally. And I actually thought this was the norm. I thought everybody spoke to plants because my paternal grandmother was an amazing green-fingered witch, and she liked to make little baby plants, cuttings, and we sang to them and spoke to them. And I thought that was done in every household. And it was a real shock to me when Prince Charles was kind of pulled up for being a crazy person in all of the national newspapers when I was quite young, and for talking to plants. And I remember that was a real pivotal moment in my life where I began to realise that it wasn't the societal norm to have a very deep relationship with nature. And as I grew up, I became more and more disconnected and disillusioned with society. And I really couldn't understand a lot of the destructive behaviours that capitalism brings. But it drove me to this rage. I felt such intense rage as a teenager that I left home, joined the road protest, and ended up living on the road in caravans and trucks with other very rageful youth, punks and hippies. And we formed this family, a community of souls that really took care of one another in a very nihilistic setting. Because with all that rage and youth, you can hurt yourself because you're putting all of your energy against something, and something as big as the huge weight of capitalism, the military-industrial complex, the agro-petrochemical companies, that the things that I saw and still see as very negative elements in life drove quite a nihilistic path in those days. And thank God for the herbs to be able to pick myself up and put things back together. Things like milk thistle to support my liver when I was drinking or taking too many drugs. And yeah, so it wasn't until I was a parent, I was 21, when I discovered that herbal medicine was a degree. I met someone at a party who had just done the degree, and I thought, oh, brilliant, I can go and turn this into a profession, into a career.
I love that. Oh my God, there's so much there that I want to pick up on, but just the idea that you and your grandmother would be singing to little cuttings is bringing me such joy, and like how magical. Like, why wouldn't we want to have that in our childhoods and provide that for other people and have that connection? We'll talk about how we go from disconnection to connection in a bit. But maybe let's talk about how you both met then. What brought you together? Because it's clear that there was someone in your life, Fiona, and there was someone in your life, Kaz, who kind of directed you towards the herbalism and the degree. But then there's this union of you both. How did that happen, this partnership?
Yeah, we met during the very first kind of freshers week, and we recognised in one another a rageful spirit, someone who is quite disillusioned and angry with the status quo, and a wildness. We recognised that we had a rebellious nature and a wildness straight away.
Yeah.
And that led us into a whole world of exploration, because as Kaz has said, you know, this kind of a nihilistic side of the disillusionment had led us both to need plants to help support us physically, but also we wanted to go out and explore what going out without alcohol and drugs looked like, and we're exploring all sorts of different routes and methods, but also taking plants to parties, trying to support people that were on that purely a nihilistic path, and try and go, hey, you might want to take some of this. And it was really interesting watching the journey through the night, being in that kind of more healing viewpoint, I suppose. And yeah, and just that whole connection that we felt to one another over this, wanting to connect over partying and repetitive beats, wanting to protect and support the planet and society and create our own vision of society. But also we were in this crazy institution of medical herbalism where we were being taught plants on screens with writing on them, you know, rather than actually getting hands on with the plants. And it was when we met together, we'd go out into the fields, we'd talk, we'd sing to the plants, we'd create potions from them. And we realized that that magic could still be there even within this university setting, and that we didn't have to separate the two, which I think a lot of people that were on that degree got really sick really poorly because of how disconnected it was to the earth. And we just felt that there was something really missing from that education that we were gaining, that we wanted others to have access to.
Amazing. And is that where the seed for the Seed Sistas came from? Because it is, you know, you primarily, I think is it a community project or not for profit, but it's run and there's lots of education. It's workshops, it's hands-on stuff. I know you do retreats, all sorts of things. So how did that partnership kind of blossom?
So throughout university, we worked together. So we were learning in the classroom, but we went out and we created our own remedies from the local weeds that grew around us. And then we took those and began to work on a market stall, because what we wanted to do was go and meet people and see how people felt about herbal medicine. And we wanted to hear the stories that they had about herbal medicine from potentially their grandparents, because so much of the information has been lost, especially since the formation here in the UK of the NHS, where we have this free medical system, but it has resulted in people giving away a bit of power and autonomy. So we had all of these beautifully made remedies on a market stall. We dressed in bright colours. And what we found were people did not know what herbalism was. People would come up and say, is it homeopathy? You know, what is this? Because it was so foreign to people in a Hertfordshire town in Hitchin. But this was countrywide because we travelled a lot. So we realised that we had a lot of work to do to begin educating people about A, what herbalism actually is, and B, the common plants that grow around, the simple plants like the nettle or the dandelion, that some people, quite a lot of people, do not know what they look like, could not identify them. And we saw this as a travesty. You know, these plants are so beneficial for people, but they're so important in our cultural history, the stories, the folklore, and the magic that is part of us. it seemed so important to revive this.
And I'm so glad that you have. You're exactly right. The stories are missing. The stories have gone. I remember reading probably about 15 years ago now, a pamphlet, like a little thin pamphlet called Witches, Midwives and Nurses. And I'm sure you're familiar with it, the history of women healers. And it does talk about the correlation between the suppression of witches in Europe, in medieval Europe, and then what happened with the rise of the medical profession, where the midwives are sort of pushed aside, and it's this male, white-coated, sterilized version, and there's this huge sort of amputation of knowledge. And you guys are sort of a part of reviving that. So tell me a little bit about some of the essentials that you really wish that people knew about what's growing in their garden or in their hedgerows that could impact them in a positive way.
So it's really kind of beautiful in a way, because when you go back to the Second World War, and there was lots of trade embargoes, and a lot of fruits, things like oranges that were available suddenly weren't anymore. And the government had this like push to get people back to foraging, and started producing all of these pamphlets for how to forage rose hips, how to forage other foods from the hedgerow. And you could go and forage the rose hips, bring them back to the pharmacy, hand them in, and they would get turned into rose hip syrup and given back to the people. And what we're seeing is that there's this, like a similar thing happening now. People are having to return back to what's available, what's readily available, what's relatively safe and simple, and how can we work with plants in a more day-to-day way, rather than just thinking of them as something we go to when we're sick or poorly. So we have a couple of like simple recipes for rosehip syrup and hawthorn ketchup, which are two hedgerow plants that you can go out and harvest and create food that can then be had on your porridge, or put with your sausages, or whatever you want to eat them with. But in that way, you're getting food as medicine, daily connection with plants that you've been out and foraged yourself. And we always think, if you can just have one thing that you've picked or foraged each day, even if it's a leaf, that you've got that connection to the land around you. And it's more than just, I'm taking this for my health. It's suddenly, I'm taking this to actually connect with my environment.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the relationship then with plants and with nature, because what you said there, it just hit me so strongly. It's not just about what the plants can do for us. It's not extractive, exploitative. I'm going to take you and I'm going to, commodify you and commercialize you. There's something much. There's a deeper root here to what you're both doing and the mission that you're on. Let's just have a look at what can be added to people's lives and what can they give back when they create this relationship with nature.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. One of the most beautiful things is the alleviation of loneliness. And loneliness is a huge issue in today's society. It's the reason why people are on social media. That's what those things do. They cure loneliness. And we are so privileged, Vi and I, that we can go for a walk anywhere. And in the UK, particularly in Europe, we've got friends, and they are friends. Each one of those plants and trees and fungi has a personality. They have a character and a spirit that comes through. And the deeper you let yourself kind of go, the more you give yourself the space and the time to slow down and go for walks and begin a communication and a conversation with nature, the more good friends you develop. And at any point, whenever I have had extremes of emotion, I've got a few really, really good friend trees locally, and I can just go and be with. There's a holly and a yew tree and an oak that I walk to quite regularly. And I tell them everything. I can offload, I can go and give my offerings, I can connect. We often meet there with a group of a women's circle that I belong to at important times and moons. And there's been so many different emotions held within the area of those trees that now it becomes like a traditional space. And these are our ancient places of worship, the tree groves. Before we built golden churches, we went to the ancient trees. And when you're there with women and men and families, and you let yourself be a little bit wild, we often sing, sometimes we dance and drum, sometimes we bring speakers and picnics. It taps into something so ancient and it feels so familiar, even when people have never been and they arrive for the first time. They feel like it's something that they know. There's a deep knowing.
I really didn't expect you to say that it would be about creating friendship and combating loneliness. And that really made my eyes well up. It's beautiful, really beautiful. I'd love to hear from you both about, Kaz, you just mentioned the holly and the yew, and you mentioned milk thistle, but what are some of your plant friends and allies that have helped you both personally? Like, what are your favourites or your go-tos? Which plants do you really love and why?
This is a question that often comes up, and you can go through phases, a bit like friendships, but there is some plants that have been there all along that you'll always find growing around that will make themselves known to you, or that indeed we make sure that we plant if we ever move home or go to a new place, or even take with us when we're on the road. And one of those is rosemary, which amazingly, is we're in the depths of winter and rosemary is flowering, flourishing. And rosemary is got that evergreen energy that will carry you through the darker months, a bit like the holly and the yew that Kaz just mentioned, in terms of still having a vibrancy when there's darkness outside and damp and wet. But the rosemary's like a constant friend. And if we're ever going to a meeting that's scary, or a big public speaking event, or even an environment where you feel like you might be challenged in some way, the rosemary is really protective. And we talk a lot about essential oils and aromatic, like those volatile oils that give those aromatic herbs their scent when you rub past them. And those oils protect the plant. So they'll protect the plant from fungal infections, sometimes from too much sunlight, from animals maybe eating them. They're what are called secondary metabolites in the plant. And when a plant has this protective system for itself, it also provides some level of protection for us. And that's on a physical level. So if you've got a cough or cold or flu, or your immunity's feeling a bit challenged, but also on this more energetic level, rosemary creates this kind of force field around you of protection. Like, I'm not going to let whatever's going on here in on a deeper emotional level. And yeah, rosemary's been one of those constants that we always plant outside the front door wherever we go. And it's actually from rosmarinus. It's got rose in the title, but ros is the Latin for the dew of the sea, with those vivid blues of the flowers. But rosemary has this power of the sun. It's a herb of the sun. So there's this amazing balance with rosemary as well, with helping to bolster the emotional body.
Love that. And how would you work with rosemary? Like, what's the ritual or the protocol for developing a relationship and working with the plant in that way that you've said, to support you perhaps through the winter months? What would someone do?
So there's different ways you can work with rosemary. You can take a tiny sprig of rosemary and pop it in a cup, and we always speak to the plant when we're doing that. We always say thank you. We prune and care for the plants as well as if you're caring for a child or a friend. And pop a little sprig in a cup, making an intentional cup of tea. We'll often work with intentions while we're even making a morning brew. You can even make that a ritual and pour the hot water on and really ask for support and protection. And often we'll also work ritually or ritualistically with a plant and ask a plant what it needs from us. And that's a slightly different process that we go through. But pretty much all of the plants that we've worked with, there's this reciprocity within the relationship. Like, what do you need from us?
What might they need? I'm really curious. What do they say sometimes?
Well, plants speak in many mysterious ways, and it's about learning and understanding the language of plants. Do you want to say something about that, Kaz?
Well, I was just thinking about the elder because, the question was about what plant was your special plant, if you like, or your special tree. And the elder has asked, I feel that the elder demands attention and wishes to be back front and centre where she deserves to be. Her name is Elder, and that in itself has gravitas. But the stories and the folklore that surround Mother Holla, or Hollunda in the Germanic tradition, and she is a goddess in the Scandinavian tradition, this tree. And she's known as the medicine chest of the people. And a lot of people will probably know elderflower cordial that's on the supermarket shelves now, but maybe people remember making it themselves or their grandparents making the elderflower cordial. And that it's one of the trees that's still recognised and in the consciousness, which is lovely. But she, having this medicine chest of the people, actually means that she's got the power to work with all of our human channels of flow. As human beings, we have lots of channels of flow, and that's where we flow. So we piss, and some plants have diuretic action, which means that they increase the volume and the frequency of kidneys purifying our blood and urine output. We also poo, and some plants have this laxative action. We sweat, and it's really important to sweat out toxins or sweat when we are infected with some kind of pathogen to help the body to clear, and that's called diaphoretic. We cry, and some plants can alter our consciousness to make us more sensitive to various different emotions and open that flow of tears. As women, we bleed, and that's an emmenagogic action. And the elder has this ability to open all of our channels of flow and to alter the consciousness. And she's the only plant we have in Europe that has these powers, that holds it. There's many different plants that can do one or two of these actions. And during the pandemic that we saw, which put everyone in this state of anxiety because it was like the rug was pulled from under us, we were told that there's this virus, and the coronavirus, is very similar to the cold virus, the corona cold. And we knew as herbalists that elder has an amazing antiviral action. And we felt so, again, privileged as herbalists to have the knowledge and the security of recognizing which plants we would need to bring in. Of course, it was a complete novel virus and it was all new, but we had a layer of security, and the elder became subject of an incredible debate on the internet where people were saying that elder would be dangerous to take if you had COVID, because, and they went into all of this babble, this medical bagable. And I remember reading a few of it and I felt incensed. I got, again, this sense of rage and went out and sat with the elder and communicated in the way we communicate. So when we say we talk to plants, the way we talk to plants is through all of our senses. So it's not only blah, 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 blah with words and song. It's also through meditative techniques, drinking tea and actually being very slow with what am I tasting? What am I feeling? How is this affecting my system, my body? And sometimes insights arrive. And the insight that arose from the elder was put me back into a space of reverence. Let people know about me. I'm important. I deserve your worship. And that's really important to us.
Yeah, I had no idea that the elder had covered all of those different sort of properties for helping conditions of the human body. But interestingly, yes, I used to make elderflower cordial and also elderberry tincture. I'd go down to the south coast and there'd be these beautiful elderberries. Just before the sloes came out, I'd make elderberry tincture. And I knew that if I took that all through the winter, I wouldn't get a cold. I'd done a bit of research. And I loved it. I really found such joy in creating my own sort of medicine. And I just wonder, do you have an idea of how our ancestors from many, many, many generations ago, how did they discover these properties? Was it trial and error, or were they so much more connected to nature? They were conversing in that way with all of their senses. Was there because it seems so strange that our ancestors, wherever you are in the world, our ancestors have had this knowledge of herbalism, but how do you know which plants kill you and which plants support you? And sometimes, it's a spectrum. A little bit of poison is actually medicine, right? I've got your book, so which I love. But yeah, how did people know? I'm just curious as to your thoughts on this.
Yeah.
So we have theories around this, obviously, and what we feel is that we're tapping back into, humans haven't really changed. We haven't really our DNA hasn't changed that much for hundreds, thousands of years. And so we're kind of in the same bodies with the same senses that we had back then, but we're obviously living in a much different environment. We're bombarded in a sensory way, in a much different way than we were back then. And we do feel that working with the plants and going out into nature, we get glances into how it would be. And we forget that we are part of nature, that we are part of the process of distributing seeds and, eating fruits and then ditching the seeds. I mean, rosehip's a classic example. You might want to nibble around the fruit, but they've got all these itchy, we used to drop it down people's back as itching powder as kids. You wouldn't want to eat those seeds, so you walk on a bit and you drop the seeds the same way that the birds do. And we can think there is an idea that humans would have watched animals and seen what they're eating and not eating, and obviously we can glean a lot of information and connection from that. But also, once you get familiar with certain smells, with certain tastes, with certain feelings that the plants bring, you can build up a picture of plants that are similar to each other or have certain attributes. You get used to smells where they'll be very high in alkaloids. So they may have some of that beneficial, what you called a drop of poison, or they may be way over and you'd approach very cautiously. And there's this, when we are completely connected and in tune with the plants, we're not just coming, we can talk about intuition, but intuition is developed and learned and guided from all of our past experiences, even ancestral experiences that are brought through. And for us, it's about reconnecting in with that knowing. All of ritual nature and plant medicine knowledge has been developed by people in certain landscape or place with certain plants around them and animals around them. And that complete web of connection between the stones, the sky, the animals, the plants, the people, it wasn't all separate. It just wasn't, because we were all living amongst it. And to think that, yeah, I mean, we believe that knowledge can never truly be lost because we can tap back into all of that
Yeah,
in a way. That doesn't
interesting.
mean go out and just, catch a plant and think, oh, let's see if I can tap into it and eat a load. We've both been stung by thinking we could do that in the past by, lords and ladies is a prime example of a herb in this country that looks like it'd be really delicious and tasty to eat, but is like battery acid, caustic. You can't eat very much of that for it to poison you, but it's like, yeah.
I love it. And okay, so I've mentioned your book very briefly there. Just I've got Poison Prescriptions, which I really like. I love the illustrations. I love the stories in there. How important, and maybe you could give us an example of one of the stories, but how important are the stories and the folklore around the actual, because your books are not dry, these are medicinal herbs, there's a lot of character in them, and what's the importance there of understanding that?
The stories are really important because they speak to our souls, and when we learn as humans, we can either learn by rote, which is just committing to memory sets of lists, or with herbal medicine you can learn the Latin names by rote, but you could also look at some of the stories of that Latin or Greek root. For example, the yarrow. So a common weed in the UK is yarrow, and it's sometimes known as nosebleed, a common name, because yarrow is great at staunching the flow of blood. So it's often being used if people are having a nosebleed. And that's a very old common name. But when you look at the botanical name, and the botanical binomial system was created by Linnaeus, and he took Latin and Greek names and gave them a first name and a surname, if you like, a species, a genus and a species. And yarrow is called Achillea millefolium, and Achillea after the great warrior Achilles. And then if we go and look at some of the stories of Achilles, we know that he was born and held by his Achilles' heel, by his heel, and he was dropped into the river Styx, into a potion of immortality. And his only weakness was that heel. And that was his demise in the end. He was taken out. But he was this great warrior. And on the battlefield, there's lots of cuts and wounds. And this herb is fantastic. Yarrow is antimicrobial, so works really well against a host of different pathogens. And if you ever have any kind of wound and you're out and about and have nothing else, you can just chew up a little bit of yarrow, freshly picked, and spit it into your wound. And you know that you've got a great wound cleaning and healing herb. But on a more esoteric level, the yarrow really supports each of us individually at discovering exactly what our own Achilles heel is and working with that. So the stories give us a whole new layer. We can read in a book that yarrow is antimicrobial, that yarrow contains tannins and azulines and a whole host of different chemical compounds. But that doesn't really mean anything without it being set in place with the story.
Yeah, I love that. And now I'm never going to forget that yarrow and Achilles heel. It's gone in, right? This is how we remember things. Story is so important. So important. I obviously work with psychedelics. So myself and Rachel, we are familiar with, so there are certain roots that we do work with. There's canna here in South Africa. There's iboga, which we work with in the microdosing capacity, and obviously there's fungi, psilocybin, and we're working on a tiny micro and on a macro level as well for those deeper journeys. But I know from the book that there are also some really powerful native plants in England that are perhaps not psychedelic, but psychoactive or incredibly strong. And I just wonder if you'd tell us about the flying ointment, its ingredients, and and the sort of folklore behind that.
Some of those plants that you're talking about, or the ones that we really love and have written the book based on, are from the nightshade family, the Solanaceae family, which has, a vast amount of foods like your tomatoes and your potatoes, but also some of these really, really powerful, what we think of as magical herbs. And all plants have the potential to shift your perspective, to shift consciousness in a way, because you're imbibing another being, a spirit that you're connecting with. But these ones shout louder. There's no doubt about it. And they're herbs that we work with in clinical practice as herbalists that have a therapeutic dose whereby there's a recommended amount that can be taken a week to give you physical medicine. And above that, you're getting into more potentially toxic amounts of them. However, if you work with these herbs in a more connected way, even just growing these plants is enough to bring you into their deeply ancient mythological world of story, of imagery, of a sense of shifting and change. The alkaloids that are in those plants, your deadly nightshade, belladonna, datura, belladonna and deadly nightshade are the same plant, henbane, datura. Those alkaloids are known as tropane alkaloids, which means to change, to create change. And the stories that are connected with those plants, or many of the herbs, are around stories of possibly the origins of the story of the werewolf, and the idea that we can learn to shapeshift and create change in our own lives, especially with the datura. And there's lots of reports in the 70s of people coming into the hospital setting, having imbibed large quantities, and seeing people as fully cloaked in hair. So it removes the sense of learned reality and taps back into something that's much more ancient within us. So what we're visualizing there, is subject to lots of debate. But what you feel is that you're tapping into mythology and imagery that's been with us since childhood, in stories, in books, and then looking at how that can be superimposed into our own lives and what messaging that can be bringing to us. So with the datura, we have this word shape shifting with the datura, the idea that we wear many guises in our lives and that we have to be able to comfortably shift between them. And it doesn't mean that we're not being true to ourselves to do that necessarily.
And a few years ago, going back a couple of decades, we were at a herbalist gathering in Rutland, and one of our mentors, our teacher, Christopher Headley, rubbed a little bit of flying ointment into our inner elbows. And we had no idea what flying ointment was at the time, but we went on to dance the night away under the full moon. And it set us on a bit of a exploration into the history of this preparation, that women were healers, medicine people throughout Europe were making. And all over Europe, you find slightly different recipes and ideas, because depending on where you live, what plants were around. But in all of them, there are some of the nightshade family. So we set about to recreate the flying ointment. And over the past 20 odd years, we've made many different versions until we came up with this particular recipe that contains herbs that really support the nervous system, the digestive system, the whole of the recipe is balanced, if you like. Because if you can imagine, you mentioned these aren't psychedelics. They're not. They're sometimes called psychotropics. I mean, there's different labels that can be put upon them. But something that they do is when you go over the amount, they increase your heart rate, they dry you out. Something called anticholinergic syndrome can arise. And we've worked really hard to create a very balanced, safe way of working with them. And that takes a lot of conscious focus. And the preparation is not for hedonistic pursuits. It's something that's very special, very magical, and something to be respected.
And it's an external preparation, and which means that when you apply it to pulse points or anywhere where the blood flows, it's going straight into the bloodstream in a different way from taking something orally. And the feeling, the connection is immediate. So you've got a much, the doses can be very, very small and potentially less toxic, but still create profound change, even on what would be deemed energetic doses. Can help you to tap into something really profound.
Yeah.
And historically, we found lots of information that points at this preparation being taken through the cunt and being part of a ritual to connect in. I mean, when you think about our ancestors, the most important thing for survival is the food, the water, and the shelter. So crops, at times when we were farming and growing crops, the relationship we had with the weather, the gods of the weather, the energies of the land, the crop were huge. And one of our most potent powers as human beings is the orgasm and our sexual natures, that's been so suppressed and demonized with the rise of the church that just even the thought of sexual gratification is quite odd to many. We were doing a workshop not long ago where a group of midwives were reticent at looking at their own cunts through a mirror. I mean, the word cunt is completely demonized in the British language as well. And we don't particularly like the word vagina because it means sheath of where you put your sword. It doesn't feel very right.
No, it doesn't feel very feminine.
No.
Thank you for
And
breathing
those plants actually, they tie perfectly in with the word cunt and the oppression of women and women's knowledge, because those herbs have been vilified as well. And there's evidence to show that if you were found with the green ointment on you, which is an excellent pain reliever for sciatica, the flying ointment in itself is a powerful pain relieving medicine, that if you were found with it, you could be deemed a witch. And so these plants are they're running a parallel life with the kind of oppression of women that's happened with patriarchy that we've seen with these plants, and we watched them almost die out of use even within the medical herbal profession, because when they were put on a schedule that means only practitioners can work with them, herbalists, even though they had full access to these plants without any concerns, just the very fact they were put on a schedule under the 1968 Medicines Act meant that herbalists started building up a fear around them, and they stopped working with them in clinical practice. So we've been working really hard to revive knowledge and understanding of these plants in different areas, because they're a really important part of our cultural history. And if we lose that knowledge, then we're losing our connection to these really powerful plants of these lands.
Do you feel like, both of you, do you feel like there's a resurgence of people, perhaps maybe especially women, sort of returning back to this sense of there's wisdom in me, there's wisdom in the land is medicine, the plants are medicine, and the kind of, are you feeling there's a resurgence in herbalism, in plant medicine?
Yes, there is I think it's a little bit difficult because there is a resurgence in herbalism, but it's been commoditized. Same as there's been a resurgence in witchcraft, it's been commoditized. And I think that there's a lot of, that this whole kind of neo-paganism, neo-magical, this new look at things, it comes along with the problems of capitalism. And we hate being cynical. It's really annoying when you've got that cynical head on.
We're cynical about being cynical.
We're cynical about being cynical, but we often say there's 100 million cacao shamans now all over the UK. You can have a cacao ceremony anywhere. And it's like, well, what's all these people opening their hearts to connect? Wonderful. But where's it all coming from? Why does it have to be done like this? Why can't we? Then there's the hierarchy comes in as well. There's been a push. Lots of people have trained and become shamans. We've got a problem with that word as well.
Me too. Absolutely. If you can buy your shamanist certification, then you ain't a shaman.
And I mean, the word is, as we often say, it comes from the Manchu Tungus people in Siberia. Mm-hmm. That's their thing. Michael Harner popularized things with core shamanism. It's gone through many guises, and now it just isn't real. It's mm-hmm. not real. And you hear again and again about being your authentic self. What does that mean? What does that mean?
It means nothing.
So there's all this buzz, and mm-hmm. truly, when we get outside and off all the marketing, social media, and we're part of it as well. We're on there, and we're trying really hard to bring education and to say to people, you have this knowledge inside you. Go and connect with your local plants people, and often they're on the allotment. Often they're the older people on the allotment. We're at a real pivotal point now, because a lot of the people who remember pre-war are dying. And we've been so lucky. I had such amazing gardening mentors that had lived through the war. And when I first moved into my home, my neighbours came and really helped me out. I'm in a council house and I've got a very long, old 50s garden. And my elderly neighbours at the time came and were just sharing all of their produce and the food, and very, very open. And that's where we get real grounded things happen, where community growing projects happen, where people come together to grow food. And it's very basic, and you don't need feathers and pan pipes and all that accoutrement. There's nothing wrong with that in its setting, There's just, when I came into the world as a teenager with all that anger, I was met by a lot of British people playing at Native American Indian culture. So there was a lot of teepees. People called themselves the Rainbow Tribe. They sang various different chants that came from those lands, eagle's feathers, and that was the kind of fashion of the moment. And now it's kind of broadened the fashion, but it's still just fashion. And
for sure, yeah. I think we're craving it though. I think we're really as I can speak from someone who's both British and North African. Now that I'm older, I'm really craving my roots and my ancestors and heritage. And it's like, we don't need to pick someone else's culture and put on the costume. We've got our own. We've got our own in Britain. We've got, twigs and bones and horns, and like, you just need to work with the land and what's there. And same, for me with the North African roots. But there feels like there's such a divide from, people in their everyday, they're sort of, perhaps I use the term, they're asleep at the wheel, and they are still going to Tesco's to get their paracetamol and their Lemsips, and not necessarily like knowing perhaps that there might be a better way, but not knowing where to go, not understanding that there's so much richness at their fingertips. Where did those people, perhaps someone who's listening to this today, who's got a bit more awareness, who wants to develop a more relationship with plants and plant medicine, not in the psychedelic aspect, but how do they start? Where do they start? What's a good place for them?
So, we always say, see what's going on locally, especially with growing projects with community orchards, or have seen a massive revival in recent years, and often run community events and days that you can get involved in. Spaces where people meet, as Kaz mentioned, women's groups that meet in nature, in places. And there's always that, we're always going to see a melting pot of different cultural influences. And we're not saying in any way that we shouldn't be experimenting or experiencing other cultures, or bringing that all together in one space, and inviting that melting pot. But for us, it's more about the understanding of the origins of the traditions, and who's been affected by the popularization of those origins, what plants have been affected by the popularization. So things like Palo Santo, even ayahuasca, even cacao, what's happening in those communities where they come from, because people and plants and the relationship between those are at the heart of this. So, going to connect, there's often even local herb groups which have people from all walks of life. They'll have gardeners, they'll have elderly people that have had herbs from their mums, their grandmas, or giving it to their grandkids. They'll have younger people that are interested in herbs. But the more richness you can get with diversity of places of origin and ages, the more rich the sharing of the knowledge and the information becomes, and the more you have that connection to source, or wherever things are being brought in from.
Yeah, and there's also the Herb Society. The British Herb Society are a brilliant organisation. They're a charity that was set up primarily for herbal education. And if you just Google Herb Society, you'll find them. And they produce a quarterly magazine that's really rich and lovely. And they often are the ones that people set up herb societies in individual towns and have meetings. So really worth connecting in with them. And then, we try and send out weekly newsletters with information, with recipes. And we always encourage people to ask questions. We really love it when people write to us and say, oh, someone's written because they're suffering from Raynaud's, which is a condition that gets you really cold hands and feet. So we're able to respond by creating a blog. So we have a really lovely blog, and if anyone is interested in anything in particular, we're always happy to create an article, because the community interest company that we formed, the social enterprise, that's the aim. The aim is to educate, to connect people and reconnect people with this medicine.
And anything that we do online is about getting people connected online to get outside. So we do run online courses, and we run, also we've got an online members area, the Coven of Herbal Secrets, where, we have regular online meetings, and there's courses in there people can follow, and, lots of juicy, rich information. But the message is always, tell us what's growing outside your garden. Tell us what you've been making this week. Share what's going on for you. Any problems you've had, ask on the forum, and so that it's about not feeling alone in your herb practice, and really using the technology we've got to keep people connected to where they are, but creating this web of interconnection with it all as well.
And so important, right? I think people are really getting 2024 was, I think, the final straw of Zoom fatigue. And this year, I think people are craving in-person events. We're all disillusioned. What's happening on the world stage? What's happening in the Middle East? What's happening in America? What's happening in parts of Africa? It's just, you can either just drop to your knees or get rageful, or I think a lot of people are sort of shutting out. But when we come together in community, we can share some of the grief, and we can share some of that feeling of hopelessness, and remember that we do have agency, and that we can be a force for positive change in the world. I do believe that. And I think it really does start with really taking care of ourselves and one another, and then bringing our gifts to the wider world. So both of you are such gifted speakers, authors, activists, herbalists. I mean, there's so much knowledge that you have. And I just wonder if there's anything that you've got coming up or coming out that people who are like got their spark of interest and they're like, I want to do something, I want to connect more. What would you what's coming out this year?
So we've got our sensory herbal handbook, which is a really good starter book for getting connected with the seasons and plants, and how to do some of these processes we've been talking about. That was our first publication. We've obviously got the more witchy flying ointment poison prescriptions. And then this year in May 2025, we've got a set of herbal oracle cards coming out.
Love it.
Which is very exciting, with illustrated by Belle Benfield, who illustrated our sensory herbal handbook. And they're going to be a set of cards with lots of guidance and information in them, but about how to read plants, like what, and yes, they're cards, but also if a certain herb's coming up in your life, what might that be saying to you? You've spotted loads of primrose this year. I mean, primrose isn't in there, but you've spotted loads of, I don't know, hawthorn's been calling to you this year. What might that mean? And in the deck, we've got guidance on some of the more spiritual and emotional connections to plants, and why those exist. So why that links in with the physical actions of the plants, and where they grow and their environment and their astrology, and lots of juicy info in there. So
They sound fantastic. I can't wait. I love an oracle deck.
yeah. Who doesn't? We've been working on this deck for a very long time.
I have
since
no
before
doubt.
the first book. So this is going to be a real culmination of years of work. So
Yeah. Clearly, this is the year that it needs to come out. This is you've gone through all the phases, and this is it growing fully. So I have one final question, which is a tradition for this show, which is, if you were both made Madam President of the world for the day, what one change or law would you pass?
So a day's not very long. We would organise with others, and we'd ask the intelligent thinkers, the elders, Indigenous wisdom. We'd form a council and we would ask for all of the ideas, because there are people out there who have solutions to the world's biggest problems. We have solutions. So we need all those people, thinkers, feelers to come together and set out a very clear strategy. We need this solution strategy to be mapped. And then like a wave or a flow, we'd connect with all the other people who care and start to implement it, put it in place. And that's the way we see change. It's like a web. Yeah. It's like a web, because if everybody does their part, so it's not so much as passing one law that has to be followed. It's more integrated web of communication of people who care and hold kindness and compassion as their most important
emotions. Well, you would definitely get my vote for president for sure. Fiona, Kaz, thank you so much. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation. I've learned so much already. It sparked more interest in me. And I know I'm over here in South Africa, but there are medicinal plants everywhere. So I'm going to get myself on some sort of herbalist day or course over here whilst I'm here. So the inspiration's working. But I just wanted to say a big thank you for your time and your energy and your expertise today. And go out and do great things in the world.
Thank you
for having us.
Thank you.